It lied. It lied.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Fempreneur True Confessions podcast.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you. And if you don't know, I'm Laura or Oda, and I own a virtual assistant project management agency that is here to help out behind the scenes in your business and really get that work done so that it seems less chaotic and less crazy, and you have an ability to grow in your business confidently. So that is what we do here at ODAA. And
Cool. And I'm Angelique with Lady Powerhouse Solutions, and we help female powered businesses, um, women who are out there lighting up the world with their passion, and we help them achieve their mission in the most authentic way possible. Laura and I do really similar things, and we have chosen to collaborate and not compete with each other. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. We've been doing the podcast for going on a couple of years now.
yeah.
And, but we were uh, connected in business prior to that. So it's been a good few years. Been a really good few years, our relationship, I think. And it's grown and strengthened, and it's been fabulous. And we have an awesome, awesome guest coming back with us here today, Maria Riegger. We had a conversation with her, I guess it was last month, the month before. And I was like, you have to come back. We have to keep talking. So, Laura, do a real quick intro for Maria, and then we'll get going.
Sounds good. So, Maria is a trauma informed parenting coach and best selling author. A rocky childhood, including the death of a parent, led Maria to consider how to be a better parent in and empowering adults to reparent themselves in order to break patterns of generational trauma while leading peaceful households and transforming loving relationships with their own children. Welcome back, Maria.
Thank you, Laura and Angelique, for having me back.
Awesome. So, what you do as an entrepreneur isn't necessarily what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about today is, and that's what our podcast is about women in business, right? And
Right.
the lessons we learn. And one of the most valuable lessons I've learned this year was that boundaries are so important, especially when you're running your own business, and not just for your relationship with your clients and your team, but also for yourself so that you
Hmm.
don't burn out, right? So boundaries are super important. But I also learned I've had a experience with narcissists in the past in my personal relationships.
Hmm.
And what I learned this year is that they are also in the workplace, that they're out there running businesses and um, working alongside you. And after experiencing that this year and learning that lesson, I now look back and go, and I'm sorry about the noise. There's a nice breeze here, and I'm going to suffer through the microphone wind
No
so I
worries.
can feel the
No
breeze.
problem.
You can't hear
Um,
it.
but I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Then you've encountered narcissists in the workplace.
Yeah.
Right.
And that it's not just personal relationships. Oh, but now that I have experienced that narcissistic relationship with in business, I can now look back and more easily recognize, oh, that was also a bit, you know, crossing the lines in the corporate when I was there. Um, and it's not just about a toxic relationship or a toxic environment. I was once working for a company for a very short period of time, less than 6 months, and it was a hostile work environment. And I never knew what that meant. We're not talking about physically hostile.
Mhm.
It was an emotional, energetic hostility, energetic, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's it's out there, and now I'm and now I look at people, clients, team members so much differently. And it's not just looking for red flags. You're just looking for patterns. You're just looking for um, almost like when you're driving defensively and you're always making sure you have that way out. It's almost like that, only in business.
Yeah.
What,
Right.
I mean, have you experienced any of that?
Yes. So when I started working with, so I've been in therapy a long time, several years, decades. But when I started working with a specialized trauma therapist who is specialized in helping adults recover from narcissistic, relationships. Usually, they were subject to narcissistic abuse as a child, which was my case, which we talked about last episode. So it led me to attract narcissists into my life, right?
Mhm.
So I started working with him. He told me, as you go through your recovery, you're going to find a lot of people in your life that are just going to go by the wayside because as you
Yeah.
work on your codependency and people pleasing and your
Mm.
boundaries, these people are going to go away. And he was right. And it was amazing to me. Like there were people in my life who I had known were narcissists, but there were other people who I considered friends that as I got further along in my recovery and my recovery from codependence and my using my boundaries and working on my fear of displeasing other people, things like this,
Mhm.
he was right. I would describe my relationship to my therapist with some of my friends and he would say, well, that person is entitled because, and I would see it, right? And he was right. Those people would stop contacting me when I put up boundaries and
Yeah.
said, no, I can't help you anymore with this because it was a huge time suck. They stopped communicating with me. It wasn't necessarily a big blow up. It was just,
Right. Right.
they just kind of saw them. I didn't contact them and I told them I couldn't help them. So they just stopped having contact with me. So that was very interesting. So I think the term narcissism is thrown around a lot, and I think
Yeah.
it's a continuum, right? You can have a malignant narcissist who may also meet the criteria for sociopathy, right? ASPD, or you may have someone who has maybe some empathy but has some narcissistic traits, like maybe they're entitled or they're a taker, things like that. So it's a continuum. Not everybody is
Right.
like immediately recognizable as like a devil, right?
Hmm.
um, but there are people who definitely maybe don't necessarily meet the criteria for like narcissistic personality disorder, but have those traits of entitlement. They feel entitled to your time and energy.
Hmm.
So it's important to recognize that. And to your point, Angelique, about the workplace, you have to stand up for yourself because other people, including your bosses and coworkers, may not necessarily know everything you're working on. They may not necessarily know
Yeah.
every demand on your time at work. It's up to you to say, hey, I can't do that. And I did a masterclass on boundaries recently for my Patreon subscribers, and I used this example for my old job where and my boss was not being uh, intentionally nefarious or anything, but he gave me a bunch of interview assignments. This is when I worked in a field office. We would interview clients, and I had them scheduled from like 10:30 on. So he gave me a 1 o'clock interview, gave me a 12 o'clock interview, and a 12:30 interview, and a 1 o'clock interview. And he came to my desk and said, "Are you done with that? Can you do this interview at 1:30?" And I looked at him. I said, "When would you like me to take my lunch break?" "Oh, you haven't taken lunch?" I said, "No, because I've had appointments scheduled from 10:30 on, and now it's 1:15." He wasn't carrying around his schedule in my head.
Mhm.
It's up to me to say, hey, I need a lunch break. So when should I do it? Oh, do it now. Do it now. But a lot of codependents and people pleasers will wait for the other person to anticipate their needs,
Mhm.
right? You have to fight for your needs.
That is a really good point.
It is. And
People
we think
pleasing will
Yeah.
override
Mhm.
kind of common sense.
Right, and your basic needs, like
Yeah.
basic stuff, like to eat, right? So yeah, and but that's a big lesson for dealing with boundaries and in the workplace. You may have the gamut of people who are narcissistic, all the way to people who are just oblivious,
Mhm.
right, about your schedule and your workload. So you have to advocate for yourself, and if you're like recovering from codependency like I am, that's hard to do. That's a process.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's definitely a process.
And
I
thank you
have
so
an
much for
interesting.
sharing that.
Oh, go
You
ahead.
know, and I also worked with a trauma specialist, and she did more for me in one single session than years of therapy with a
Yeah.
traditional behavioral therapist,
Yeah.
because she knew what questions to ask and what follow-up questions to ask, and she's just so good at what she does.
Yeah.
And also when you mentioned entitlement, that word has never really occurred to me in association with narcissism, but it's there, it's
Hmm.
implied.
Hmm.
And thank you for bringing it up and naming it and labeling it and associating it with the narcissism, because that is for sure like one of the main traits,
Right.
especially in a work relationship where you are being paid to provide a service. Therefore, they suddenly feel entitled to make all kinds of demands on you because they're paying you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And they think there are no boundaries. If I'm paying you, then you're going to do all the things and you're going to do anything I ask you. And it doesn't matter how I ask. I don't have to be respectful or any of those things because I'm paying you.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
And I want to ask a question, because you said yourself, like we have that word there we go. It's the word.
You can say it.
Ah, narcissist. Um, and we label that a lot when we're feeling a certain way about how someone's treating us. And so my question kind of comes into play where um I once asked, like, how do you know if you are one? And so it's like, if you're asking, you're probably not. But the
Right.
truth is that the reality is we all have some level of it in us somewhere. We all feel
Right.
entitlement in certain things. I have an entitlement at times when it comes to my husband. Like, didn't
Hmm.
understand that? Like, it's an
Hmm.
implied thing, you know. And we were talking about stuff earlier, like with my son, where if me and your dad are having a conversation with you, nobody else matters. We're the two
Right.
most important. That's the thing, and that's that entitlement. And he may not feel that way. He's going through
Hmm.
something. It is a different thing. So seeing it at that, um, how do you explain that it's not necessarily a bad thing until it's left to its own demise to become more of that devilish, icky,
Right.
cringe moments where people can't really see it, or they really do lack that empathy, because we can fake empathy to a certain extent,
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. So the understanding of, I guess my understanding is we all have that level of it in some form or fashion, in some way,
Right.
in some relationship. We switch roles sometimes, not realizing and things. How do you know when it's you're not a narcissist, going to be, you're not a true narcissist, but you may have the tendencies to where you really are deep in that, and maybe and won't be able to recognize that about yourself. You would never think you were
Right.
one, and it would never be a
Right.
question you ask. So I'm just
Right.
curious how that plays out with things.
Right. So, what you were saying, Laura, about if somebody's generally concerned, like, I wonder if I'm a narcissist, and I see this a lot in my support groups for adult daughters of narcissistic mothers. Like, am I the narcissist with my kids? And Dr. Romani says this too. If you're asking yourself that question, you're really concerned,
Right.
99.9% chance you are not a narcissist. You don't meet the
Yes.
criteria for the cluster B personality disorder. Now, I'm not a therapist, so I don't want to talk too clinically, right?
Right.
But yes, we all have some narcissistic traits. And us adult children of narcissists who do not have narcissistic personality disorder, we call them like a narcissistic fleas. It's like negative conditioning. And I noticed that in myself when I was parenting my son when he was younger. Like, I would be very dysregulated and I would feel like, everything was attack on me personally, and it wasn't. It was just him being a toddler, or him being a
Mm.
5-year-old kid, or now him being a teenager. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So it's tough, and a lot of people get fixated on, is this NPD or is this ADHD or is this whatever? I would focus more on the behavior and how troubling it is to you. If your partner every time you say no or withhold a boundary, if they never respect it, huge problem. If you're that goes for your partner, your boss, maybe, like Angelique, you're saying it's a little trickier in a professional relationship because it's a contractual relationship.
Yeah.
But if somebody never respects your boundaries, if somebody, gets angry at you every time you uphold a boundary or say no to something, it's a big red flag that they're trying to manipulate you into getting an answer they want, right? So that's a good. It's hard to have like a quick test, right? But you know, taking your time will also help. Like the more time you can give somebody, like if you're starting a relationship with someone, wait a long time, take things really slow. If somebody wants to speed things up beyond your comfort level, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody not respecting your no. And narcissists at the beginning of a relationship will test you, right? With something apparently innocuous, like, do you want to drink a wine? No, I'm not gonna drink alcohol today. Oh, come on, you can have just one. If they don't respect the no, that's a huge red flag, even if it's something seemingly innocuous, right?
Mhm.
So those are all things you can kind of be alert to. Um, and if you've been in a narcissistic relationship, like I have, and like Angelique has, you want to look out for those things so you know what to pay attention to in the future so that you're not attracting the same type of people. Because narcissists and codependents are like a perfect match for each other. Because the
Yes.
codependent is the giver.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give in the hope this person will love me and stay with
Mhm.
me. And the narcissist is happy to take all your energy and all your time until you're burned out.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to avoid. Yeah.
I
And the
recognized it
fact,
later. Like I knew other people had dealt with it. And when I was recent, because I'm like, I wonder at times, you always have that wonder, like, oh, that, people talk about it and like, oh, well, you tend to do that from time to time or this or that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was when you're questioning that. And then when I started recognizing where I could see in work where that was happening, I could see in my
Right.
past relationships where for me, if they were just pushy, or it was
Mm-hmm.
just this, or it then became that, well, they really wanted me involved. So then it was like, it was flattering, like, you want me there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But now,
Right.
but, like,
Right. Right.
that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so even when
Yeah.
you're not thinking, like, I know a lot of people, like, I've never been in a narcissistic or had that
Right.
experience in relationship or anything. And I'm like, hmm. I'd be interesting to see where that really lies true because I'm sure somewhere along the line you've probably ran into someone and maybe just didn't recognize it because it wasn't what you're focused on, but really that recognition. And being an empath, I was warned as
Yeah.
I started looking into this. You're married and you found your person that isn't going to do that to you and you're now comfortable, but
Right.
that's a good point.
yeah,
Right.
you're an empath and they'll come to you in droves. Like they're
Yes, they will.
suck up your energy. And if you
Yeah.
don't recognize faster, you're going to
Right.
continue in that same burnout mode where you're now, and for me, I'll let people go to a certain point, push and push and push, and then I am an abrupt cutoff. So
Right.
you could have access to me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then you may never hear from me again. It will be a literal cut off.
Right.
And I have that ability. I learned that very young. Probably not so healthy, but it's still that, so I do know to recognize it quick in that cutoff, but it's
Yeah.
difficult because I think most of us have had some type of um interaction in some way that we just didn't recognize it as it's coming,
Right.
you know.
Absolutely. A good indicator, too, and this is from the book, The Sociopath Next Door, which is excellent read. A good indicator when you meet somebody the first time is like, is the author calls it the pity play. If they present themselves as a victim, oh, poor me, like I need your help, that's a good indicator. Now, we all go through periods where we need help from people, right? Like I reach out to my sister, like we have a relationship, we mutually help each other, right? It's not always me helping her or her helping me. But if somebody's painting themselves perpetually as the victim, to invoke your pity, that's also a big indicator, right?
Right. And
So,
and
yeah.
it plays right into that people pleaser, that
Yes.
empath wanting to take care of and please people.
Yes.
and help them feel better.
Yes.
Um, and it's like they have radar or something,
Yeah. No, they
you
do.
know?
They do. Because everything, you know, I'm very spiritual. I believe everything is energy. And if your energy is giving off
Mm,
those, I'm the helper vibe, I'll take care of you, they're
yeah,
drawn to that. Yeah. On some kind of visceral level. Absolutely. And,
yeah,
you know, another good indicator is if they're always, in their mind, their needs are always more important than yours. And they won't come out and say that,
no,
you know, but they'll say, for example, you'll say, I need some alone time. So I'm not, you know, let's not text or talk today because I do my own thing. They text you repeatedly wanting a response. But I told you I need some alone time. Yeah, but I'm having a really hard day. I need to talk to you. Okay, so you're telling me your need trumps my need right now because I told you my need and you're giving, but it's couched in this very, I really need you right now, I want to be with you right now, I really need to be close to you right
yeah,
now, but you're still trumping my need after I made my need specific.
mm-hmm,
So they're very good at that. So
yeah,
it takes, you know, and I hear from people, they say, oh, who would end up in a relationship like that? Well, because they don't come wearing horns and a pitchfork,
no,
right? It's like they
no,
come
it's
with, they're
so
very
submersive.
charming. They could weaponize therapy speak a lot of the time, right? They're very intelligent a lot of the time.
Yeah,
So you're not going to know necessarily until you start to feel burned out and drained, and you think, why am I burned out and drained? Well, I'm not getting my needs met. My energy and time is being sucked up. But it takes a while to come. Sometimes it takes a while to come to that realization. Right.
yeah. And this cycle of, um, and it could be they just lose their temper and then they're so apologetic. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. And, um, and why I didn't recognize that, because I had experienced that in a former personal relationship. And here it is happening in a professional relationship. Why am I not recognizing it is for what it is? And it's because, and this is the point I want to make, it's because of that very mushy line
Mm-hmm.
between I have a contract and an obligation to this person versus they're just a friend
Mm-hmm.
or a romantic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and why that feels more important, or we give it more weight, or we'll take more abuse because of it, is beyond me, because it should actually be the other way around. But um I am proud of myself though, because I'm my tolerance, my ability to pick up on the red flags and my ability to set the boundaries and honor them, uphold
Mm-hmm.
them, as you said. And that timeline has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter as I
Mm-hmm.
have matured and healed. Is I don't tolerate as much as long. And but I still tolerate. And I want to get to the point where, kind of like you, Laura, it's like 0 to 60 or 60 to 0
Yeah.
in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not sure, other than, I when I was, and I'm still in a community. I'm in a community on Discord, and lots of people in their healing, but also lots of healers, lots of therapists, lots of hypnotists, lots of, um, and somewhere in the conversation many years ago, someone said, you can't heal in a vacuum. And that's what I was doing, was I was
Mm-hmm.
isolating myself and calling it healing.
Right.
But you can't heal in a vacuum. You have to be in relationship with other people.
Yeah.
So you have to risk.
I
You have to
know.
risk. And that feels like
It's
the
hard.
hardest part.
It's
But
very hard.
once you do it and then you go, oh, I recognize that red flag. And then you go, I'm going to
Yeah.
set a boundary. And it's almost exciting because
Yeah.
you set the boundary and then you're like waiting. Oh, are they going to honor it? Or are they going to break that boundary? And do I get to leave? And
Right.
it feels more like an opportunity instead of they're taking something away, because you finally realize
Right.
that they are an energy suck. They're an energy vampire. And if they can't honor your boundaries, especially, then you need to let that go,
Mm-hmm.
because that's just going to suck the life right out of you.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
I think
That go ahead, Laura.
I was gonna say, I think where I started recognizing these, and when I asked, like, what are narcissistic traits? What does this really look like? When me and my husband first got together, he's very set. He's strong. He's got his ways. He is who he is, and he's clear. No problem saying no. I'm a people pleaser. I have a very hard time with that. And when we first get together, it was one of those things where he may go out for the evening and he's out with his friends and he's doing all that. Well, my idea was, well, I'll just text and say hi and we'll chit chat through the evening. He's out with his friends. And then that's where it came up was, am I having these behaviors? And then it was, it wasn't that. It was, I wasn't trusting. It was the trust problem for me. Mm-hmm. So then it was like, well, you need to make sure you're texting me back and prove that you're not doing all this. And we went through that moment. And it was one of those where he set the boundary, he made it clear, and then was like, you're either going to accept that when I am out, I probably won't text. Mm-hmm. You'll see me when I get home. There will be no conversation. Now they go out fishing for 12 hours and I don't even bother to pick up the phone. And it may be 6 or 7 at night. I'm going, or 5 or whatever. I'm like, oh, I wonder if they want dinner. Or, oh, it's late. Where is everybody? You know, like it doesn't recognize. And that was one of the things where I think when I started questioning and asking those questions, like, are these just traits? Are these other things? But then being able to recognize that and say, so it's not always where that's what's happening. There's something else healing and really being able to recognize. So it was a trust.
Yeah, and giving ourselves grace for that.
From a real narcissistic behavior. And then, you know, learning from that point, like, oh, I don't need to do this. We're okay. And that trust can be there once we were comfortable there. But it was, he was solid. He's like, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to continue to do this. And you will either accept that because this is what I do and how I am with this. You'll figure it out. Like, you're going to have to heal you. And he knew that. So it was just very interesting because his boundaries are very clear with that. And it definitely helped me in that, being able to not have somebody bend with me and really make that solid choice and allow me to just work through that. Like whatever you're going to need to do to work through that. And if I didn't accept it and I really didn't like it and I didn't want it, I had a choice to leave. There was never that, well, you don't get to go. You're going to just have to accept it. It was, is this something I can learn to deal with and be okay with, or do I need to leave? And he left it at that, you know, and it was really nice to have that. And I know it doesn't work for everyone, but it helped me recognize trust factors and that it could be other things that are coming out in those behaviors.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And you realize that it was largely your issue to work on. And that's huge. You know, because if we've been betrayed in past relationships, which a lot of us have, the trust is tough. Like, I'll be honest, I'm divorced twice. I'm like, I don't think I'll ever do another live-in relationship. It's too hard. I don't know if I can handle it. So that's kind of where I am. Like, I clearly have a lot of healing to do, but that's future question for a future time.
Right.
But Angelique mentioned, I wanted to mention this about the isolation. Yes, isolation is isolate, however you want to describe it, isolation or just alone time for yourself. That's a key part in the healing process, is when you distance yourself from anybody who's been toxic and you give yourself time to just sit with things and detach. That is key, because when you're outside of the presence of these toxic people, you know, trying to manipulate you, take your energy, you can see things more clearly. That is key. But you don't, like you said, you don't want to stay in isolation forever.
Yeah.
You have to get the clarity and then, you know, do the therapy, the trauma work, anything you need to do. But you're right. And it's very tempting to just stay away from everybody.
Yeah.
But we don't heal that way. And we need, you know, we need relationships. And like, I'm still working on like my relationship with my kid. I have issues with that because we're close. Sometimes it's difficult for me to uphold boundaries with my kid because in the back of my mind, subconsciously, I'm thinking, oh, he's gonna hate me if I do this, or if I say no, he's gonna hate me.
Mhm.
And in working with my therapist, I realized no, that our relationship is strong. Even if he's irritated with me in the moment or angry in the moment, he can be angry. He can be
Yes.
angry, but it's not gonna harm the relationship long term. And I have to teach him healthy boundaries for himself. If I have poor boundaries with him, he's going to learn poor boundaries for himself, and he's not going to learn not to respect the boundaries of others or that others don't have boundaries. I don't want to teach him that either. So that was tough, but a necessary lesson. If you're because I work with parents, that's an issue for
Yeah.
a lot of us is we want these close connections with our kids, but we also want to make sure that we're teaching them limits and boundaries, right, for themselves too.
And I think the trust thing also is a factor even in the boundaries that you have and the relationships you have with professional relationships, because there have been plenty of times where um a client has it had a bad experience with a contractor or subcontractor, and it's hard for them to trust. It's hard for them
Mm-hmm.
to allow you access to their business. And again, it's almost like we'll let them in emotionally to our personal self before we'll allow them into the business side.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you about that kind of stuff about my business. That's proprietary. Y'all, we are proprietary. We need to have those same kinds of feelings about our heart and our mind and our soul that we're
Mm-hmm.
sharing in our personal relationships as well.
Mhm.
Um, and so and it's just curious to me now that we're talking about it. Now my mind is just going. I'm like, why do we have the professional business relationships on a higher caliber or pedestal, not pedestal, but like we hold them to a higher standard than we do our personal relationships? I mean, am I the only one that's sensing this?
That's a
Is it
really good
just me?
point.
Yeah.
That's a
No,
really good
not
point
just.
because there's some inherent limits to the professional relationship, right? Like this is a work relationship. Clearly, keep it professional. We compartmentalize a lot of our personal stuff, but yeah, a lot of us are quick to like open our hearts and overshare early on, and people are used to like instant gratification, right? I mean, and
True.
or instant relationships and meaningful relationships take time and patience to develop.
Uh,
That's a great test to know if somebody is toxic, like you guys were saying earlier, if they're very pushy, if they are really upset about your efforts to like take things really slow and work on things and be patient. That's a really good indicator that that's not the person for you. They want to rush things. um but yeah, that's it's we I think a big lesson is we need to get to know ourselves and not rush into friendships, relationships, not overshare, take things slow, and really pay attention. Yeah, so it's definitely a long-term process. And yeah, I think like you say, we're better about doing that, generally better about doing that with professional relationships because of the
Yeah.
nature of the relationship.
Yeah. Like
But yeah.
before you enter into a contract with someone, um, or you hire someone, you do a background check.
Mm-hmm.
You go on the internet and you Google them. Like, how many times? I mean, pre Risa Tisa, okay? I don't know if anybody knows who Risa Tisa is, but before that, we didn't do that stuff with personal relationships.
mhm.
Now, proof of funds is like the new thing that you do when you're in a relationship,
Yeah.
you know? And I think it's not just about a fiscal proof of funds, but it's about this proof of caliber,
Mm-hmm.
like putting your money where your mouth is. Another
Yeah.
business term, right? That we should be
Yeah.
applying to our personal
Yeah.
lives. But
Yeah.
I think that
Uh-oh. Oh, that's fine. Your audio went down a little bit.
Okay, but I'm back.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. As you guys can tell, if you're watching on video, I'm in my car. I'm mobile. I'm mobile today. But yeah, I think it's just so important for us to recognize that the same types of to kind of circle back, Maria, to what you do as a parent, that relationship. I don't know about Laura, about you, but in working with clients and also with interns and subcontractors, there's a little parenting going on. They call it coaching now.
There's a lot.
Mentoring, coaching, yeah, for sure.
But it's adult. And it's,
Yeah.
and my approach has always been kids. I worked with teens forever. And you're right. There is a bit of that. No matter what you're doing, you're always still mentoring and babysitting is a terrible word. But I giggle from time to time because I'm like, we're babysitting the situation as a whole, within it, and that definitely is. And then it's our opinions, like, this is my business. I see it a certain way. I want things to run a certain way. And the VAs may not work that way, may not be that way for them. They have a different style or whatever. So then again, it's that, okay, well, this is where we don't see eye to eye, and how are we going to come together in that, and figure that out? Because if, as a business owner, if I'm unbendable, and I'm completely unwilling to mold a little bit my own self within the business, that then becomes, I feel like, that same kind of, it's my way or the highway feel, and that doesn't feel good. It didn't feel good in corporate. It doesn't feel good when and when you sit back and have that moment, because every so often there's that moment, like, I know this isn't going to work for you in this way, but we really need to do it this way. And so that push, they're not always going to be happy with that, and but there's times when it's necessary. So again, those moments of, I have to do it this way, but most of the time I'm pretty, I'll work in a way that other people work to kind of to make it cohesive, and work with them in their best way. So yeah, I think.
Right. Because anytime you have people working together or people in a relationship, personal or professional, there's going to be conflict at some point, right? And we're not all the same. We don't all have the same background and conditioning. So it's how to navigate that. Yeah. And yeah, I agree. Like, we do best when we're kind of adaptable and open to learning, right? We've all had that experience probably. Well, why do we do it this way? It's not efficient. Well, we've always done it that way. Okay, well, that's not a reason to continue doing it that way if it no longer serves us or work for us. So that flexibility, that open-mindedness is really important. Yeah, professionally too, as well as personally. Sure.
This has been a really good conversation. Any last minute thoughts?
I would just reiterate what, Angelique, you were saying earlier about, if you're in the process of kind of beginning this, working on your boundaries and beginning to really state and reinforce your boundaries, it's, you'll have some anxiety, right? Because you're not used to doing it, but it's also very empowering. And the more you state your boundaries, and the more you reinforce your boundaries, and by reinforce, I mean, like, state a consequence, like, if this happens, I'm going to have to do this, or if this happens, I'm going to stop talking, or if this happens, I'm going to leave the room. Follow through on the consequence. So when I say enforce boundaries, that's what it is.
Good point. What are some good examples of boundary setting?
Yeah.
And verbalizing that, because that's one thing that that kind of was the tipping point for me, was, okay, I need to verbally set and hold this boundary.
Right. So if it's in a personal relationship, and I talk to a lot of parents who have to set boundaries with their parents, right? Adult children who are setting boundaries with their parents, because a lot of times the parents feel entitled to, see grandkids at a certain frequency, or see everybody on the holidays. Well, you're not entitled to your adult kids' time. Sorry, but you're not.
Yeah.
So, or they insist on talking about topics the adult child doesn't want to talk about. So you can say, if you're on the phone, it's easier to uphold. So you can say, hey, yeah, I'm not talking about that anymore. I've already answered that question. Is there anything else you want to talk about? If not, I'm going to hang up the phone. And then if they insist on continuing asking you the same question or talking about the same topic, okay, well, then I'll talk to you later. And you have to hang up.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, well, that's rude. Yes, but they're not respecting your boundary, and that's rude.
Mm-hmm.
You have to enforce the boundary, right? Because my experience with people like that is, if you don't enforce the consequence, they will not respect your boundaries. There has to be a consequence. It's almost like training a kid.
With you.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to enforce a boundary, and I no longer have contact with that person.
Right.
Yeah.
But my hope is, ever the optimist, is that they learned from that.
Right.
Oh, I lost that relationship, which was beneficial to me in whatever way, shape, or form, professional, personal. Next time, I will honor when somebody says something like that. I will, I won't push the envelope, so to speak.
Right.
That's my hope.
That's the hope, but that's out of your control.
Right.
Right.
And the realistic fact, and I was talking to somebody about this just recently, they don't change. If they truly are a narcissist, or on that spectrum, whatever, change is highly unlikely.
Right.
That's how they're wired.
Right. They have to take the initiative to do that. That's possible, but like you said, unlikely.
So challenging.
Yeah. So we can't. I mean, I talk to so many people who they just I want to make this person see my point of view. Yeah, but that's beyond your control. If they don't care about it, or don't want to see it, or just don't care about your point of view or your needs, they're not going to. So you're spending all this energy, and at some point you have to make a decision. Am I going to expend more energy on this relationship or this communication? So and another example, I don't text after, I don't know, 10 p.m. I'm not going to respond to texts because I wind down for the night. People text you wanting a response. Turn your phone off. Don't respond. Don't respond. So you train them effectively. You can text, but I told you I don't text after a certain time or whatever, so those are, when we say enforce boundaries, it's really, you state a consequence, like, here's my consequence if you violate this boundary, and then follow through on the consequence.
I say to people all the time, I know your boundaries there, and I know that you shut your phone off, but you're not going to respond. I'm still going to send the message because my ADHD butt really needs to do that in that moment.
Right.
Don't bother responding. I know you're not, and I say that all the time. And I think sometimes there is some confusion in, like, a neurospicy person can get confused with overstepping those boundaries and different things.
Yes.
And then I tend to have to say is, I have to do that for me because of how I think and the way things are. I am a big out of sight, out of mind kind of person. And the second it's out of my sight, I'll forget to do it. So I do that for me. My expectation is for you to do what you're going to do. If you choose, that was your choice. If you choose to respond back. But I tell people all the time, like, I'm going to send that message at the time when you tell me you're not, I'm not allowed. I will, but I have zero expectation for you to bend and get back to me or do what you say you're not going to do. Those things clear, because I think sometimes we do confuse some of the neurospicy behaviors with narcissistic, and then it comes back.
Right, that's fair.
That's fair. I didn't do that because I was trying to pass a boundary. I did that because if I didn't, I never would have said it.
Because your
it's important to have the conversation. And people with ADHD, sometimes they have poor impulse control. Like the now takes precedent over whatever they were told before. So, okay, this person said X boundary. Well, you want to do this now. You think of it now. I'm doing it now. Oh, but I forgot. They told me in the past. I learned this in the past. There was a consequence in the past, but now it takes backseat to what's happening right now, and that's the ADHD. But if you, if you know that, and then your expectations are, okay, this person is not going to respond, and you don't, try to make them feel bad or try to, double and triple text, that's a different story.
Yes.
So it
Because
takes, it takes somebody who's
is
right.
I understand I'm not going to get a response. I don't expect to get a response. That's
exactly
very different than, and then also what you were saying, that recipe of this is the boundary, this is the consequence. That consequence needs to be stated. That's such an important part of the recipe. Yes. You don't bake a cake without the sugar, okay? It ain't a cake without sugar.
Right.
It is not a boundary without a consequence. Would you agree?
So, yeah, especially if somebody is chronically pushing on your boundaries, chronically, violating boundaries, you have to state the consequence. So, and sometimes it takes, for whatever reason, a sense of entitlement, ADHD, they're just the impulse control sometimes takes effect. You're going to have to state the consequence. So, and upholding boundaries and enforcing the boundaries takes a lot of energy, right? So people are going to have to also recognize that and let you give yourself permission to rest. Like it takes me, because I have complex PTSD, so I feel like everything takes me more energy to do just dealing with life. So with my mother, reinforcing the boundaries constantly sucked so much of my energy. I had to minimize contact. I had to, because I was constantly, she was constantly violating boundaries. And I was constantly saying no, and I was constantly having to, and it just took so much of my energy. I had to say, I have to minimize contact because I cannot do this all the time, right? If you're blowing up my phone and I'm always answering, I cannot do this. So, you leave one message, that's it. I'm not going to respond. Doesn't matter if you call me 10 times in 10 minutes. If it's an emergency, call 911. There's not a lot I can do for you. I'm not where you are physically. So, it's important to recognize that, like you need to take the time to recharge your batteries, right?
We had to learn that in our family, and we moved states. I finally got to a point where, and before my mom passed, she was like that. She was sick, and there were no boundaries. We were dealing with that, but she didn't have boundaries before she got sick, so it just heightened the whole thing when she did. But it was then after that, and she had passed, that I started recognizing other family members. Part of being married into a family is you bring them with you, and that kind of thing. And 6 years ago, when I'm like, I'm leaving corporate, I slowly started recognizing I was cutting stuff out. It had all got to that head, and I was done. And it was, we're moving too, because the truth of the matter is, I needed more than anything to get away from all the people's demands around me. That included all friends and family too. And by chance, and I love her, she's great, but our mother-in-law followed us a few months later out here, and there was that conversation of, I really needed this break, and it was hard. So we're still struggling through that, because that, it's not my mother, but I've been here 16 years dealing with this. So, there's those difficulties. And what I've come to now is, if I don't want to deal, I won't. Comes over, I want to talk to her, I go in another room. If I don't want to go to the house for the family dinner, I don't go. I don't go to Christmas anymore. I am absolute in refusal. And my husband knows that is a boundary I will set. If I choose to go, I will. If I don't, I won't. And he understands. I always try to explain. He's like, you don't need to explain. Like, through the episodes, like, you don't. So it's always that good thing, because even though he may not do that, I can. And that's something, where it's like, well, my husband always makes me go, I'll be damned. Somebody makes me do something in this moment, especially not my own parent. It's not my own parent or my own family in that way. And I love her. She's like a mom to me. She's a lot for me energetically, and I don't, so there's, when I became clear with that, and that I could say to him, I don't want to be rude, but I can't do this anymore. I'm going to set this boundary, and you can do what you want. It doesn't mean you don't go, or you don't do that, or
exactly right.
He calls,
but you don't have to do everything together like all the time. You both don't have to go over there all the time, right? And that way, by communicating that clearly, now you don't end up resentful because you feel forced to go all the time, and when you really need to recharge your batteries. So that's important. We need to speak up for ourselves, because if we don't, and we just let ourselves be influenced, and we don't have good boundaries, and we do things we really don't want to do, we're going to end up resentful, and then other people may not understand why we're resentful and upset. But we need to communicate that. So that's, it's key for sure.
Love it. So glad you came back.
Thank you guys for having me. This is great. I could talk about this all day.
I know, and we want to be respectful of your time constraints. So, one thing we didn't talk about is the last time you were on, you gave away 3 chapters of your 2 books.
Yes.
So we're going to do that again, or are we doing something different?
Yeah, you know what? If you guys want to email me, I'm happy to give free ebook copies. Yeah, because that would be great. So if anybody's interested in the full book, I have a book on Gemini children. So I'm a Gemini, and I have a book on Scorpio children. My son's a Scorpio, and I cannot avoid those people. I have so many Scorpio people in my life. I can't avoid them. But yeah, so they are for parents of those children, but they're also for Gemini and Scorpio adults who are like reparenting themselves like I am. So if you guys want to email me, and I'll give you my email address, it's maria@lawschoolheretic.com. Happy to send you a free copy of either book, free ebook copy. And I will say, if anybody's in the Denver area, not this Saturday, but the next Saturday, I'm giving my TEDx talk on teams and boundaries right outside of Denver. So
Well,
you guys
from
are free to.
Colorado. We moved here, so
That's exciting.
people you were even Rachel Jinks. She was a past guest. I'm sure she would love. So also,
Well, that's great.
yeah.
Yeah, it's TEDx Cherry Creek, right outside in Parker, Colorado, right outside of Denver. So if you just Google it, TEDx Cherry Creek High School, it'll come right up, and my name is there. And tickets are still available. I would love to see people. I'm really, really excited about this talk. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's huge.
Thank you very much.
And we'll drop the links in the show notes for
Wonderful.
everything. The TEDx talk, the email, so you can email her for the free book. I am a Gemini as well, so I will be wanting that book. And thank you so much again, you guys. The only thing we're announcing again this week is sponsorships are available now for the podcast. If you're interested, just go to our website and check it out. Then let us know if you have any questions. Maria, thank you once again for being with us. We so appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Laura and Angelique. Thanks so much for having me back on. This is great.
Absolutely.
All right,
Anytime.
cool.
This has been fun. So,
Yeah. All right. So hang out for just 1 second when we stop the recording so it can finish uploading. And I'm going to do that.